Well, Darius, welcome to the show, man.
Thank you. Great to be here.
So we've done a few of these now, kind of episodes around, startups that didn't work. Obviously, as people know, like my last startup didn't work. So I've learned what that feels like to work for 5 years and not end up with a win. But I think what I've realized is there's so much to learn from these stories. I learned a lot going through it myself, but I'm also learning a lot talking to people who've gone through it and didn't make it through. And especially because after doing so many interviews with hyper successful founders, I just realized that there's a lot of things that successful founders associate with their success that I know failed founders did too and didn't succeed. So trying to suss out what really kind of makes the win and what doesn't, I think is it's important to get both sides.
That's product market fit.
Product market fit.
Product market fit.
I call that the product market fit question.
Product market fit.
Product market fit.
Product market fit.
Product market fit.
I mean, the name of the show is Product Market Fit.
Do you think the Product Market Fit show has product market fit? Because if you do, then there's something you just have to do. You have to take out your phone. You have to leave the show 5 stars. It lets us reach more founders and it lets us get better guests. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing the story. Let's start at the beginning. Like, what is Howdy and how did you kind of end up there?
So it's definitely unusual given my background was in real estate, private equity, and development. And so essentially what happened is I was working as an investor for PSP Investments, and I'd always wanted to start my own thing. I'd been kind of a hustler entrepreneur since I was a kid. And I decided to start an asset optimization platform. And this was about 2019. And so I did that for about a year, had some initial customers, hadn't built out a product, had revenue, and all the things about doing things that don't scale. And then COVID hit, and we had to do a complete left turn. And we wound up with Howdy, which was really setting out to make online learning more social and engaging by connecting people taking the same course through live video. And how we got there was because of the asset optimization platform. We were essentially trying to create a marketplace that paired different companies to do a collab inside of their office space. And so if I'm a late stage startup and I want to kind of build a pipeline of tech talent from a boot camp may go to that startup office space and say, hey, look, can we do a free presentation here? We'll let other people in from the public. It'll bring recognition to your brand. And then we'll also kind of start building that pipeline of like junior engineers that could potentially come on and you can hire them. And so it was this idea of like optimizing space that the startups were using and then allowing other companies to come in and pitch them or use them for informationals or different presentations, trainings, etc. And once COVID lockdowns came into place, that business model became untenable. And we saw this need obviously to go remote. And essentially, thinking back, my mother's a retired New York City public school teacher. My brother is a public school teacher. And so education has also been really important to me and access to education. And so we saw this opportunity now where everybody was on lockdowns and really no way to interact. And so we said, well, people are learning, like the signups for online courses has gone through the roof with everyone on lockdown trying to learn a new skill. What if we use those platforms as a channel to connect students taking those same courses through a technology that we built? And so that's basically what we did. So it was a completely different right turn. And it was...
Where does that come from? Like, does that just organically kind of pop in your head? Do you see something? Like, do you know students who are all of a sudden learning from home? Or like, what is it that actually leads to that idea?
Yeah, I saw that everybody now was going on to Zoom and trying to conduct these webinars, but was completely missing the network or the in-person experience that these boot camps or these other kind of training companies were able to provide. And so I saw this gap where it was like, okay, these companies are still charging the same amount, $10K for a coding boot camp or whatever, but the experience is like significantly degraded. And so thinking about, okay, well, how do we, these were our initial customers, partners, and people that we were kind of co-developing the platform around, if you will. It really wasn't even building any code at that point. It was more just trying to understand, user sentiment and customer discovery. And so anyway, so that was it. It was like everything's been like overnight turned online, but the experience is horrible. There's no network, there's no community, there's no ability to make real human connections. And we all know from like time in college, we know people that that are successful. Like networks are so important, and yet that was like completely devoid from this segment of the market. And we wanted to come in and provide a solution that, with this idea that anyone, regardless of geography or upbringing, should be able to build a authentic network for work and life. And we use these learning platforms as sort of that initial beachhead and channel to do that.
Where do you go from there? Like, do you just go off and start building V1? Do you start doing a bunch of like classic research and customer discovery?
Yeah. So the natural thing was to go to my grad school professors and ask them, I knew that there were some that had really successful online courses. So I went to Barry Nailbuff, who's a kind of in academia and entrepreneurship, bit of a folklore in that he's also a world-class academic, but also a very successful entrepreneur. He co-founded Honest Tea and sold that to Coca-Cola for a bunch of money. He had a successful course on Coursera. And so I basically said, okay, what's a good starting point? Where are my relationships today where I could potentially get distribution, and started there. And he agreed to try it out. So at that point, we had built sort of a widget that you click it on pop-up, you can see the other students taking the course, and then you can click on their name and schedule or invite them to a chat, and then join that call with them. And so all without leaving the course experience. And so we tried it out in a very janky, hacky way. You put in a link. We hadn't built in any single sign-on stuff or integrate it. And we saw it actually starting to work. And engagement was going up. Online courses, even for the best courses taught by professors like Barry Nailbuff, who's from Yale, they have low engagement. They may be better than the average, but like you're talking 90% of students drop out of a course who start one. And so it's a massive problem that's plagued the industry for years, and no one's really been able to figure it out. And so we actually saw engagement rates, completion rates start to go up. We were like, wait a minute, we're on to something here. This is actually working. And so we kind of doubled down, and then we got another university. So Berkeley School of Music is out of Boston, world-class business music school. They piloted us with 3 courses. They started to see positive metrics, and they went from 3 to 60, 70 courses in like a span of maybe a month.
And were they paying for this, or like what was the revenue
That
model?
was the thing, is that, we had very smart angels and advisors. I had like the former VP of product at LinkedIn Learning and other vets that have been come out of Silicon Valley that basically said, don't charge the schools anything. Like, you're effectively building a marketplace, like keep getting the product right. This was maybe like a year in of product development. And they said, don't worry about monetization right now. Like, just make it so good that they can't ignore you.
What year was this, by the way?
This was
2021?
2021. Yeah.
Okay. So you're also, there's a macro context here. Maybe that's important. I don't know. But like, there's a lot of hype in the market. There's a lot of things that, there's a lot of free money at bay.
Right. Exactly. It definitely wasn't a time of discipline and frugality. Let's put it that way. And so I think the overall sentiment was just keep growing out the platform, and those things will kind of fall into place.
And what did they imagine? Because like, but I will say the other side to it is a lot of times when people hear that, it sounds silly, but the reality is a lot of massive products got built that way, got built by not caring about monetization. But there's always a at least idea of what could be. So I guess in your case, like these people that are telling you, and you're obviously accepting it, so you have some idea of it as well. Like, what was the kind of master plan? Like, yeah, okay, we'll build this marketplace, we'll get a lot of people to start collaborating and talking to each other. We won't charge the schools, but then we'll charge.
So the master plan, we really were thinking about education into 3 categories. One was the training that you get, or from the education, like the skill that you actually learn. The other one was the certificates or the degree. So what does that say to the world? What signal is that, and the value of that signal? And then the third was the network. That essentially were the 3 pillars and each one of those are massive opportunities. You have credentialing and certifications. There's different certifications, masters. Universities are rolling out different types of masters to lure other segments of the market. It's a huge revenue driver. But then and then the skills, obviously, that you learn through those programs. But what was missing from any of the virtual programs, and still is today, quite frankly, is this network piece, right? And if you're learning online, because we all know there's convenience of learning online, not everybody can pay an arm and a leg. We have this plethora and a massive access to this content to learn, but we have no network. So we were really going to build the plug and play network for any online learning program that you kind of integrate in your course, and you kind of have all the tooling to increase engagement, student experience right there within your existing learning management system. And we thought that was also an attractive approach because it was like, we all know the switching costs associated with trying to get these traditional institutions to move from one platform to another. And so our value prop was to say, look, you're already using this. You don't have to change anything. We're just going to enrich and improve engagement to what you already have. And that was the approach or strategy that we took to begin with. And then, obviously we were thinking about like this expert network to layer on, afterwards, where we thought, building marketplaces notoriously difficult. And so we thought, okay, if we start with the students, right? Like if we just allow the students to build like a peer-to-peer network through this platform, and we have that demand, then we can sort of provide supply, because the students that were already on these platforms, they were not having a good experience. As I said, the engagement rate, the completion rates are talking 5-10%, for courses with hundreds of thousands who are taking it. And then again, like it's just a human thing. We want to build relationships. We want to support each other. We want to feel like we can be encouraged and held accountable. So that was it.
It's kind of like, the net is like, you own, like at the end of the day, you own the students. And obviously those students will pay for other courses, maybe pay for expert advice, maybe, whatever, like TBD, maybe they get recruited. You could be like a LinkedIn for students. Like there's just a lot of different places you could be if you have an engaged base of smart people in your network.
That was precisely our thinking and why we were so excited about it.
You're getting the right signals, like you're getting usage, you're getting engagement. Can you share some of that? Like on the one hand, I understand how much did completion rates improve by, like when you talk about engagement, how did you measure it and what were some of the numbers?
We measured it based on a couple of things. So one was like the likelihood to come back for a meeting. So we would look at cohorts that started out in certain time periods and like what was the percentage of the people who engaged with someone that came back for a second meeting, and start, just to see like, and obviously a big part of our focus was like quote unquote time to magic, where, when someone comes onto the platform or comes into the widget or whatever, you want to try to accelerate the time that they can actually schedule and connect and jump into a live session with someone. And so we were looking at that. Okay, so that was one metric. And then the other metric was just completion rates, like how many people that are not using the tool completing the rate. So just before Howdy, taking just a standard Coursera or edX, these are the platforms that we were on, what were the completion rates there? And versus what they were for the students that actually participated in our thing. And so that wound up, it varied across courses. So if you use 95% as a benchmark, we were seeing in cases like 80, 75%. And, when you look at it in the context of like a free course, right, where like students are, it's a freemium model where they come in, they sign in for the course and they pay for the certificate. That's huge, right? Because you're talking about thousands of students that you otherwise wouldn't be monetizing that are now going through that system. And, we were also benchmarking it to other companies like boot camps that were getting a lot of attention, like Lambda School, for example. And they were putting through a couple hundred, I think, at the outset through their program. Now, obviously, they were a bigger, each student, I think their ACV value or however they measured it was like 30, 40, 50 grand. So they could do that and still build an attractive business. We were kind of looking at, wait a minute, here's this like really successful darling in EdTech that's like processing a few hundred. And here we're doing like, hundreds and in the peak thousands, right? So we're just very exciting, very encouraging statistics. That in some ways is the holy grail of online learning, and we seem to have sort of figured it out to a certain extent. Obviously, you need to continue to improve, and we had a ton of ideas to do that, but it was very promising, and that's why we were able to get the adoption, engagement, and participation from these schools in the beginning.
So you're starting to roll out, like you said, that one university, Berkeley, they're rolling it out to more and more students. Do you try and like raise money, or you just keep building product? Like, where are you trying to go with this?
A couple things. One is, I tried to suss out the willingness to pay, but the issue was these were like our lighthouse partners. And so they were really valuable because we had all these, like the average study group on our platform was like 4 different continents, right? So like people literally were coming from all over the world to meet, learn, and support each other. And so you had different devices, you had different, communication techniques, cultures that all gave us like a really challenging set of like technical problems that we thought if we could get right through these courses, we'd build like a really robust platform. But then also the testimonials that came from that is like, listen, we've got Yale, we've got Berkeley. So we didn't want to, so we would push it, but we would never push it that hard because we were using that to sort of continue the snowball. And in hindsight, that, now that I'm, effectively an expert in EdTech to a certain, any person that builds in this space quickly learns, it's like, that's not the right approach for this market. Right. And so you learn, in hindsight is 2020, but yeah, absolutely. Like I think, in retrospect, we should have pulled the plug, like maybe taken the device out and said, hey, listen, sorry, like to see the numbers going down. We really love to support you, but we also have a business to run. And I just didn't want to put ourselves in that adversarial kind of situation. And I was a first time founder. And again, like the relationships mattered. And I was just trying to it was allowing us to build a really good product around it too. Right. And so, but that ultimately wasn't the right decision, to say the least.
What did you like? And just remind me, like, when did you end up shutting down the business?
End of last year. So 2023.
So when do you start seeing the signs that, things aren't kind of going the right way?
About a year in. Yeah. And then that's when we pivoted and we tried all these other areas. And so, I just realized that it was really hard. And listen, it's no fault of the buyer. Like ultimately, if you're not delivering the thing that they want, then it doesn't matter. And so, but I realized that like whatever vision or product we were building wasn't resonating with the economic buyer. It was resonating with the user. The students loved what we were doing, right? But the economic buyer had different set of priorities. And
what were their priorities?
Their priorities were things like as simple as just digitizing their content. So like, okay, they've got now this COVID situation, they've got to start having courses online, or maybe they want to start new certificate or online first programs. And so now they've got to like create all this content that's tailored to the digital form. So that's one thing. The other thing is like top of funnel, like schools are probably one of the, like universities are probably, you have probably some of the best like marketing people in the world, because you have to generate a massive top of funnel and continue to feed that in order for the business, of the school to work. And so anything that like would attract more students into their program or build that top of funnel was super valuable. Ultimately, like MOOCs, like a program, like a world-class program like Yale or Berkeley or Cass or these others, it's like at the end of the day, their priority is their traditional business, which is the core university, the people that are going there, spending $80,000 a year to get a degree, undergraduate, whatever, like that's really their core constituency. It is as great as it is that they have this content and as helpful it is to the world. Ultimately, like the experience there is just, it's institutional bandwidth. They're just limited to where they can prioritize. And so it's really no fault of their own, but it's just the way that market is structured.
Yeah. So, and that makes sense. And I think like large enterprise, like this is true outside of just EdTech. I think any large enterprise understands what their core business is and is always going to be focused on that core business. And as a founder, you got to figure out what that is. And if you're like, making a 10x impact on some fringe thing nobody cares about, you're just never going to get the attention you want. My question to you is, as you start seeing these signs, do you start to pivot into some of these other problem areas?
Well, it's a good question. So we pivoted into other areas, but we pivoted, quite frankly, into a different market. So we weren't as excited about this market anymore because the alternative was like, okay, we're going to build a learning management system, or we're going to build like an attendance tracker, or like there wasn't anything that really jumped out at us as being really exciting and we thought could create a big market. And so we ultimately decided to change markets altogether, and we went into SMB. So think of your online tutoring course, your online boot camp, your sales and marketing online course, but these are not institutional companies. They have much tighter budgets. Yeah, they can make decisions faster, but they're harder to get to. And like, there's a million different variations of what they need. And so it's like, well, how do you know what the beachhead is in terms of like, do you go all in on like language tutor market, right? And like build the product for them to start and then expand from there. Like, because I wasn't coming from this wasn't my expertise. Like I was learning every day on the fly about the market and everything else. And so I had to literally, I literally had to go out and do the hard work of pounding the pavement to try and build up excitement and figure out who the buyer was and how to get to them. And this is extremely resource intensive when you're trying to do this in like a small team. And so like that was sort of it, but again, like I wanted to make sure that I didn't have any regrets looking back and say, oh, what about this SMB market? And then we even went to enterprise, you can talk about that. And so like, but I think what's really one thing, it's like, you got to be able to say, okay, what is my target? What are my goals? And be really honest about achieving them. And if you don't achieve them, you have to have the hard conversation of saying, maybe it's time that we go, in a different direction, or we shut down, or we look for a buyer, or whatever. And I think just being sort of a tenacious founder and like wanting to like give it my all, I wanted to explore these other avenues. I certainly didn't want to, because we built a really awesome product and users really, that we had really loved it. And so, I wanted to, but again, hindsight is 2020.
Do you think there's something you could have done that would have
in retrospect? Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what I could have done. I could have pivoted now, like right around a year before we shut down the company, we could have integrated large language models into the peer-to-peer sessions to basically be an automated facilitator for these different topics. And so if you had a student that was, multiple students coming to study group, one of the challenges that we ran into, as well as like, okay, making sure that there's someone who's like kind of type A that's going to like lead the discussion and like it's clear like what the intent of being in that group is. And so we had to build like very like hand engineered prompts or suggestions or like links to like study notes or content. And we did all that stuff through like traditional deterministic code. But I think quite frankly, there's still an opportunity to sort of layer on these large language models and like have this expertise that's like scalable through an LLM, but then also have like the network and human connection. So I think like if I was going back to do list, that's where it would be. But by then I was like, I was so burnt out. Like the team, it's like, I just went through all these iterations. Now there's this new technology. Okay, let's try another year to try to figure this out. And so
tough, man. Yeah.
It was really tough. And then ultimately it was like, wait a minute, my background's in real estate. Like what, it's like if everything had been remote forever and everybody was like, living in their, hyperbaric chambers and like never interacting, like, yeah, sure. This would have grown to infinity. But that when we came out of the pandemic, that was no longer the reality. And so like the market we had gotten less excited about like this virtual opportunity and market. And all while when we're pivoting again, it's like, wait a minute, like I've done over a decade of real estate, private equity, development, construction. And so maybe I need to get back to my roots. So
So maybe like on that note, then we can end it there. And my last question to you would be, if you had like, what is some either the or some of the kind of biggest lessons that you take from this, that if you were to start another startup, you would really like have top of mind going into it?
I mean, I think the most important in retrospect, it sounds obvious, is understand the structure of your market. There are certain industries, education, I know some people that have built in healthcare that share this, is that because of the regulation and the way like some of these universities or institutions have existed for, hundreds of years in some cases, their priorities are not always what their customer, if you look at a student as a customer, like their customers' priorities are not always their priorities. And so really being honest with yourself about, is what I'm building aligning with who ultimately is writing the check? And I think is super, super important. And again, because I didn't have that background in education, I had to figure that out. I had to learn it. And I had to for me, it's like, I'm a student. I want to have a network. I want to meet people. I went to get an MBA. It's like one of the reasons you get an MBA is so you can build a network and support. But like, not everybody has the luxury of doing that. Not everybody can like spend a bunch of money or like go off the United States. And so I wanted to create that opportunity for other people. But like, it didn't matter in the end if like there was just some structural barriers to making that happen, right? So just studying that, I think, very closely is very important. And then the other piece of this is obviously trying to push for get them to pay. Like, hey, listen, if you're not going to pay, it's obviously not that important to you. Like, let's just be adults about it and stop trying to think that, because on the one hand, like you have people, everybody says like determination. Look at the person that went through this 5 years and paid themselves nothing and, slept on their friends' couches. And then they emerged with like 50 million ARR. And the reality is like, one, that rarely happens. And two, like there's other signals that you can gain where you can build confidence that whether or not that's the right decision. Like if you believe and you have the grit to do that, great, but try to pull in those signals to make sure that you don't have to go through all that pain and suffering needlessly. Yeah. And then there's some, there's a million other things, but those are, I think, the most, the ones that have been seared in my memory for forever, I think.
Awesome, man. Well, Darius, thank you so much for sharing the story with us.
Awesome. Thanks, Pablo. Take care.
85% of people who listen to the show just started listening to it this year. You're probably one of those people. In fact, the odds are 85%. Guess what? You need to go back because there are over 100 other episodes that you need to check out that are just as good, if not better, than this one. Don't miss out.